Okay, let's unpack this. Have you heard of Windows 2000? I mean, really thought about it lately.
Wow, Windows 2000. Yeah, that's a blast from the past, isn't it? Y2K era .com bubble.
Exactly. For most of us, it's just this, like, nostalgic relic, a digital antique piece. Maybe you remember seeing it on an old server rack somewhere.
Uh-huh. Fading beige boxes.
Right. But what if I told you that this piece of history is actually still out there,
Yeah.
quietly humming away, running critical applications?
Oh, absolutely. It's surprisingly common, more common than you might think, especially in specific industries or even small businesses that have that one piece of software.
And often they're sort of marooned, right?
Yeah.
Stuck on hardware that's practically falling apart or maybe locked inside some ancient virtualization setup nobody dares touch.
That's the core problem. These aren't just museum pieces, they're vital cogs, sometimes running actual production processes. But they're trapped on these old, unsupported, frankly vulnerable operating systems.
So the big question becomes, how do you keep them alive? How do you move these essential but super fragile systems onto something modern, something secure, without having to rebuild the entire thing from scratch?
It's a real tightrope walk. You've got the necessity you have to keep it running versus, well, the sheer technical challenge of dealing with something so old.
And that right there is our mission for this deep dive. We're looking at a recent success story from the Homelab community. Someone actually did it.
Yeah, this one intrepid homelabber managed what seems kind of impossible on the surface. They successfully migrated a really stubborn Windows 2000 server VM.
And not just anywhere, but onto Proxmox, which is, a pretty powerful modern open source virtualization platform.
And the best part, they stumbled upon this really counterintuitive trick, a specific step that made all the difference after lots of failed attempts.
So we're going to peel back the layers on this wild adventure, as they called it. We want to pull out the secrets, the clever workarounds, and just, appreciate the ingenuity involved here.
Because this isn't just one person's side project, right? Their journey is like a practical roadmap. It shows how a bit of creative thinking and really understanding how these systems work underneath can bridge that huge gap between old tech and modern infrastructure. It's like digital preservation in action.
Okay, so let's get into the quest. Why? Why even try to bring a relic like Windows 2000 into the future? Part of the answer, I think, lies in the destination. Proxmox. Maybe we should quickly explain what Proxmox VE is.
Good idea. So Proxmox VEVE stands for Virtual Environment. It's this really powerful open source virtualization platform. It bundles a few key technologies together.
Like KVM.
Exactly. KVM, which is the standard Linux kernel-based virtualization, and LXC containers, which are lighter weight. Plus, it's got really robust storage management built in, all managed through a nice web interface.
And is a big favorite in the Homelab world, right? Sort of the darling of DIY server nerds.
Totally. Because you get all these enterprise-level features, think high availability, live migration, clustering, but without the hefty enterprise price tag, or the complex licensing you get with VMware or Microsoft's Hyper-V. It's about control and flexibility.
That flexibility seems key. So migrating something like Windows 2000 to Proxmox, the reasons are pretty clear then. You want to keep it alive longer, maybe run it more efficiently on newer hardware.
Yeah, and centralize the management. Get it off that old physical box that's probably sucking power and could die any minute.
Right. Pulling it off hardware that's literally on its last legs.
It's really a strategic move, trying to reduce that technical debt. Like you said, that old physical server might be power hungry, noisy, maybe impossible to get parts for if something breaks.
So moving it to Proxmox means better hardware use, easier backups maybe.
Definitely, and potentially more stable too. You're isolating that old OS from potentially failing physical bits. It's running inside a stable virtual environment.
Okay, but the stakes in this specific story, they were really high. This wasn't just playing around. The Homelabber needed to move a critical Windows 2000 VM, and it came from VMware Player 12.
Yeah, VMware Player, which is, typically meant for desktop use, maybe testing, not really designed for running production servers.
But this one was production. It ran a special app-controlling production machine. That's a direct quote. And downtime was a non-option. Wow. Imagine that pressure.
That detail changes everything, doesn't it? It tells you this probably happened out of necessity. Someone, years ago, set up this critical app on whatever was available, maybe Player on a desktop, and it just had to keep running.
And that downtime is a non-option part. That turns it from just a tech puzzle into like a high-wire act. You need serious planning and probably some serious ingenuity.
Absolutely. Which leads us neatly into the first big problems they faced, the initial hurdles, or maybe the great VM extraction, as you called it.
Yeah. So hurdle number one, just getting the VM out of VMware Player 12. Player isn't exactly known for its robust export features, is it?
No, it's pretty basic. So they had to get clever. The first thing they did, crucially, was shut down the VM properly for data consistency.
Always shut down first if you can.
Always. Then they simply copied the virtual disk files, the .vmdk files, directly onto an external hard drive.
Just a straight file copy.
Yep. A smart, low-risk move. It meant the original production server could be started right back up if this whole migration thing went sideways.
Yeah.
You always want that fallback, especially with production systems.
Good point. Okay, so files copied. Then what?
Then, at home, they used VMware Workstation 17, the bigger brother to Player, to import the VM using its .vmx configuration file.
And the absolute key step here.
They checked it booted. They made sure the VM actually started up perfectly in Workstation before doing anything else.
The source mentions a funny bit here, like jokingly cursing Broadcom, VMware's parent company, for the extra hassle. I think we've all been there with vendor changes, making life harder.
Yeah, it's relatable. But that pro tip from the user, always verify your VM boots, cannot be stressed enough. Seriously. Skipping that, you're just asking for trouble. Migrating a broken VM is, well, pointless.
So true. Okay, VM extracted, verified. Solid start. Next up, backing up the past. How do you even back up Windows 2000 effectively for this kind of move?
This is where the real nostalgia kicks in. They use Windows 2000's own built-in backup tool. Remember NT Backup?
Oh, wow, Ent Backup, yes. The backup wizard. I remember that interface.
Exactly. They launch the wizard, make sure to select the entire C drive, and the system state. That system state part is critical.
Why the system state specifically? What's in there?
That grabs all the really important configuration stuff, the Windows registry, user accounts, critical system files, CM plus database, basically the personality of the server. Then they saved it all out to a .bkf file.
Okay, saving a potentially large .bkf file from Windows 2000 onto a modern network, I smell trouble. Compatibility issues.
You guessed it. A big one. They had to save it to their Synology NAS, but here's the catch. They had to specifically enable SMB version 1 and NTLM version 1 authentication on the SATA share.
Oof. SMB1. That's not ideal from a security perspective these days.
Not at all. But, as the source says, Windows 2000 doesn't play nice with modern SMB versions. It was a temporary necessity. You have to bridge that communication gap somehow.
And I bet it wasn't exactly speedy either.
The user's quote was, "It takes a minute," which, in sysmin time for a potentially large backup over SMB1 probably felt longer than a minute. Patience was required.
So that Ent Backup with system state, why was that so vital beyond just getting the files? Why not just rely on the copied VMDKs?
Because the VMDKs give you the disk image, but the Ent Backup with system state ensures you capture the configuration in a restorable format. It guarantees things like the registry, user accounts, specific application settings tied to the OS are all preserved properly. If the VM import failed, this backup was the key to potentially rebuilding it on a fresh install.
Okay, so it's like a belt-and-suspenders approach. You have the disk image and a state backup.
Exactly. And while today we'd use fancy tools like Veeam or maybe Vention for backups, and backup was free, built-in, and crucially compatible with Windows 2000, sometimes the old tools are the right tools for old jobs.
Right. Okay, this is getting good. Now we arrive at the breakthrough, step 3, the real magic. After trying and failing repeatedly to just import the VMware disk into Proxmox, our homelabber did something different. What was the pivot?
This was the crucial decision. They stopped trying to force the VMware disk to work directly in Proxmox. It just wasn't happening. Driver conflicts, boot errors, all sorts of problems.
So what did they do instead?
They decided to start clean. They built a brand new, fresh Windows 2000 server virtual machine directly within Proxmox.
From scratch, like using an installation ISO.
Exactly. They used a specific Windows 2000 server ISO. And interestingly, their original activation key didn't work for some reason, so they had to find a publicly shared one online, making a little joke about going pirate to get it installed.
Needs must, I suppose. But why do a clean install? Wasn't the goal to migrate the existing server?
It seems counterintuitive, but the logic was sound. A clean install guarantees that the base OS is using drivers compatible with Proxmox's virtual hardware, which is based on QEMU KVM, very different from VMware's. It avoids importing all the VMware-specific driver baggage that was likely causing the previous failures.
Ah, okay. So you build a clean foundation first, one that you know works in the new environment. Smart. So they have this fresh, empty Windows 2000 VM running in Proxmox. Now, what was the secret weapon? This is the really clever part, right?
This is the absolute genius move, the core breakthrough. They took that .bkf backup file, the one they made earlier with N2 backup, and copied it into the new clean Windows 2000 VM running on Proxmox.
Okay.
Then inside that clean VM, they ran NT backup again, but this time using the restore wizard.
To restore the old server state onto the new clean install.
Exactly. But here's the killer detail, the absolute key. When they configured the restore, they chose to restore everything, except one specific folder. CWINT System 32 drivers.
Wait, they excluded the drivers folder during the restore? That sounds risky. Wouldn't that break things? Why do that?
It sounds risky, but it was brilliant. Think about it. Proxmox uses QEMUK VM virtualization. VMware uses its own proprietary virtual hardware. The drivers are totally different.
Right.
If they had restored the old VMware drivers from the backup into the Proxmox VM, Windows 2000 would try to load drivers for hardware that simply doesn't exist in the Proxmox environment. That leads straight to boot failures, blue screens of death, disaster.
So by excluding the drivers folder from the restore,
They kept a clean, Proxmox-compatible default drivers that the fresh install had already set up. The restore brought back all the user accounts, the registry settings, the applications, the data, everything, except the incompatible hardware drivers from the old VMware environment.
allowing the OS to boot smoothly, using the drivers native to its new virtual home.
Yeah.
That is clever. Very clever.
It let the new environment's drivers take precedence. It's allowing Windows 2000 to adapt.
And the result? Did it actually work?
According to the user, the reaction was basically, holy shit, it works.
I can imagine the relief.
Absolutely. Local users were there, folder permissions were intact, most of the applications just worked. The critical system state was successfully transplanted onto a working Proxmox base.
You called this the secret weapon for legacy migrations. Why is this specific technique, restoring minus the drivers, so important? Maybe even beyond just Windows 2000.
Because it addresses a fundamental problem when moving between different virtualization platforms, or even physical to virtual, P2V. Drivers are tightly coupled to the underlying hardware, real or virtual. Trying to force old drivers onto new, different hardware is a recipe for failure. This driver exclusion method is a powerful technique. It's about intelligently restoring the state and data while letting the new environment handle the hardware interface layer. It's smart adaptation, not just a blind copy.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so victory was achieved. But usually there are a few loose ends, right? Step 4, ironing out the kinks. Were there any post-migration hiccups?
Yeah, a couple things needed polishing. First, that special app, the critical one controlling production machines, its specific driver needed to be reinstalled manually after the migration.
So some application-level drivers still needed attention.
Exactly. Which, as the source notes, shows a somewhat responsible sysadmin approach. You don't just migrate and walk away, you test and verify, especially the critical components.
Good practice. What else?
The other thing was the network speed. The default network adapter Proxmox emulates for older OCs like Windows 2000 is often a Realtek RTL 8139.
Which is like 100 megabit, right? Not gigabit.
Correct. It capped out at 100 mellos. The user noted this but decided to tackle it later. It wasn't immediately critical, but it's a common post-migration tweak needed for better performance.
And is there a fix for that? Getting gigabit speeds on such an old OS in Proxmox?
Yeah, the standard fix is to switch the VM's network device type in Proxmox settings to use the Virtio adapter. Virtio offers much better performance, including gigabit speeds.
But I'm guessing that's not just a simple switch for Windows 2000.
Probably not seamless. It requires installing the Virtio drivers inside the Windows 2000 guest OS, finding and installing compatible Virtio drivers for an OS that old. Well, the source calls it a task for the brave. It often involves hunting down specific driver packs online. It's doable, but another little adventure.
Okay, so we have the success story, the magic trick, the minor cleanup. But equally important are the things that didn't work. Lessons from the trenches. What failures did our homelabber encounter along the way?
This part is super valuable because it saves other people from hitting the same walls. They tried several things first. Cloning the original VMware disk using Clonezilla failed. It just resulted in an OS not found error after restoring.
Okay, so direct disk cloning was out. What else?
They tried a multi-hop approach, importing the VM into a temporary VMware ESXi host first, then trying to migrate that to Proxmox. Same result. OS not found.
Still no good. Any other attempts?
Yes, they also tried exporting the VM from VMware Workstation as an OVF, Open Virtualization Format file. Then they used Proxmox's command line tools, QM import disk and QM import off, to try and import it.
That sounds like it should work. OVF is supposed to be standard.
You'd think so. And apparently that OVF file did import and run correctly in VirtualBox, another virtualization platform. But in Proxmox, no dice. Still failed.
Wow. So Windows 2000 is just particularly tricky for these standard import methods into Proxmox KVM, it seems.
It really seems that way. The older boot mechanisms, the partition layouts, maybe disk controller issues, something about it just doesn't translate well using those common tools.
And you can feel the frustration in the source, right? That quote, cursing the idiot who put this critical system in VMware Player. We've all felt that inheriting a less than ideal setup.
Oh, yeah. That raw honesty is great. But it highlights why those direct methods often fail with really old operating systems. Modern tools often make assumptions that just don't hold true for something like Windows 2000.
And the community aspect came through here too, right? People sharing their own struggles.
Definitely. When the homelabbers shared their story, others chimed in. People facing similar issues moving from Hyper-V to Proxmox, for example. Someone even mentioned running Windows 98 successfully on an Apple Silicon Mac using QEMU, which is the same tech under Proxmox's hood.
So it is possible, but requires specific techniques.
Exactly. The overall feeling from the community discussion was clear. Yeah, legacy migrations are tough. They require patience, trial and error, but they're also really rewarding when you crack it. And having that community support, sharing what worked and what didn't, that's absolutely vital. It's the secret sauce, as they put it.
Community support is the secret sauce. Love that. Okay, let's tie this all together. Why this breakthrough matters to you, the listener. This isn't just one person's cool project, is it? It's more like a roadmap.
It really is. This specific Windows 2000 to Proxmox journey gives a concrete example, a blueprint. But the underlying principles, they apply way more broadly. Anyone messing around in a home lab or even in a small business trying to keep old but essential software alive can learn from this. It shows Proxmox's power and flexibility, even for these ancient workloads.
So the bigger picture, this kind of success means you can preserve applications that might otherwise just have to be retired, right? Even if they're critical.
Exactly. It reduces that dependency on dying hardware, frees the application, and ultimately it empowers you, the user, to modernize your setup without that terrifying prospect of rebuilding everything from zero.
Proxmox's flexibility plus these clever workarounds like the driver exclusion. That combination really seems like a win for homelabbers especially.
It's huge. And it loops back to that power of connection, the community. The homelabber was clearly grateful for online help, mentioning tips about Clonezilla, site internals tools like Disk2BHD. That collective brain trust is what turns these daunting tasks into successes.
There was that quote someone shared too. Proxmox is bulletproof but tough to master. That kind of sums up the challenge and the reward, doesn't it?
Perfectly. It captures that thrill of the adventure, the satisfaction when you finally figure it out and make it work.
Okay, so wrapping up, what does this all mean for you listening? If you're thinking about your own Proxmox migration or just tackling any tricky tech problem, what are the key takeaways for getting that win?
Well, first off, solid backups are non-negotiable. That NTEP backup, as old-fashioned as it seems, was absolutely fundamental here. Get a reliable backup before you touch anything.
1 second, verify, verify, verify. Check that VM boots at every major stage. Don't skip that pro tip. It saves so much pain later.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid to pivot. If direct imports or clones keep failing, maybe that fresh OS install, combined with restoring your data and config on top, is the better path. It worked wonders here.
And the magic trick. Remember the driver exclusion. When moving between different virtual hardware platforms, leaving out the old drivers during a restore can be the game changer. It avoids those nasty hardware conflicts.
Also, don't forget the native tools. Sometimes, like with NBackup here, the tools built into the old OS are the only ones that really understand how to back up and restore its state correctly.
And maybe most importantly,
lean on the community. Online forums, Reddit, Discord servers, whatever your platform is, these communities are invaluable. They're full of people who've likely faced similar problems and can offer solutions, or at least commiserate and brainstorm with you. They really are the unsung heroes.
Proxmox itself gives you this amazing, free, powerful platform to experiment and innovate. You can breathe new life into old systems, try out new things.
It really opens up possibilities.
So whether your dream is keeping that critical Windows 2000 app alive, or maybe, you just want to fire up some old Windows 98 games in a VM without digging out an ancient PC, the tools and the knowledge are out there.
Go grab some coffee, channel your inner sysadmin, right?
Exactly. Embrace the challenge. There's a real exhilaration, a deep satisfaction in nailing a flawless migration, especially a tricky one like this. Your home lab's next breakthrough could be just around the corner. Go find it.